Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 8 of the Delhi edition. This column helps us gain an insight into dark matter and dark energy and a scientific experiment known as Lux Zeppelin experiment, which has been in news recently. See, dark matter refers to a mysterious unseen substance that is considered to make up 27% of the mass of our universe. According to many physicists, the universe and the matter that we all see and perceive hardly constitutes around 5% of the universe, and it is hypothesized that the rest of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy. Dark energy is said to constitute around 68% of the universe, which is seen to be responsible for the ever expansion of the universe, and the invisible dark matter is said to constitute around 27% of the universe. See, this dark matter, which is postulated, is not visible to us because it does not interact with any electromagnetic force. It does not absorb, reflect, or emit any light, thus making it extremely hard to detect and spot. Whereas normal matter, on the other hand, that we all see and perceive, they interact with electromagnetic force, they absorb light, reflect light, and emit light. Thus, normal matter becomes visible to us, whereas dark matter cannot be perceived by us. In fact, back in the 1990s, it was postulated by physicists that the expansion of the universe, which started with the Big Bang, is likely to slow down and come to an end eventually due to the effect of gravitational force. And physicists were certain that the expansion of the universe is going to slow down and even come to a stop at some point of time. But then came the landmark findings of the Hubble Space Telescope beginning from 1998, which conclusively proved that the expansion of the universe has accelerated over billions of years, and it was not slowing down as postulated earlier, thus pointing towards a dark, mysterious energy which might be repulsing the universe to undergo this constant expansion, that to at an accelerated pace. Eventually, physicists and theorists they came up with an explanation to explain this anomaly, where the universe started expanding following the Big Bang, later slowed down for a while, and further started accelerating. And this expansion continues in present times as well. So, according to theorists and physicists, this can only be explained by the repulsion between galaxies being caused by a dark energy, which is unknown to us and something which can't be perceived by us. Later, through experiments, the existence of such dark matter and dark energy was indirectly proven through various experiments in particle physics. Over the decades, researchers have been able to infer the existence of such dark matter only through gravitational effect that it seems to have on visible matter. So, to detect the presence of this dark energy and dark matter, several experiments have been taken up around the world. And one of the leading experiments is the Lux Zeppelin experiment, which has been commissioned recently and has started searching for dark matter. The Lux Zeppelin experiment is said to be the next generation experiment to find dark matter, and it attempts to detect and observe weak interacting massive particles that scatters at the nuclei level when it interacts with any energy or radiation. This experiment facility has come up 1 kilometer underground in an old gold mine in South Dakota, located in the United States. This ambitious project has been given shape by combining the two previous experiments, that is Lux and Zeppelin, and it happens to be a collaborative effort of universities and institutions located across US, UK, Portugal, and Russia. This experiment facility, which is said to be one of the most sensitive particle detectors in the world, makes use of liquid xenon, which is stored underground, so that it is shielded from all forms of radiation and dust, thus cutting it off from any form of electromagnetic interference. So the only interaction it is going to have will be with dark matter and dark energy, and if it leads to any scattering at the nuclei level in xenon particles, that would be detected by the experiment, thus providing indirect evidence with regard to the existence of dark matter and dark energy, and would corroborate the various theories that have been postulated over time including Einstein's theory related to the cosmological constant. In fact, this is not the only experiment which is hunting for dark matter by employing this method of xenon scattering at underground facilities. Apart from Lux Zeppelin experiment in the US, there are two more similar experiments underway, which includes the xenon NT experiment in Italy and as well as the Pandax 40 experiment in China. So these underground particle experiments are crucial to develop our understanding of dark matter and dark energy, which makes up majority of the universe, and to give us better insight about the origin of the universe. Now let's take a look at another column from page number 8, which helps us understand the new guidelines that were issued by the Central Consumer Protection Authority with regard to service charge that was levied by hotels and restaurants. It also helps us understand the role, functions, and the authority of the Central Consumer Protection Authority. I am sure many of you are familiar with the service charge that is imposed by hotels and restaurants as part of the bill, and customers were expected to pay the service charge as well, which essentially constitutes a tip towards the service staff. But however, providing a tip should be a choice that is left to the customer, and it cannot be made mandatory by the hotels and restaurants as part of the bill. So this was the issue that was brought up recently in front of the Consumer Protection Authority. And in this regard, the Consumer Protection Authority has passed an important ruling and has stated that the practice of levying service charge as part of the mandatory bill amounts to an unfair trade practice and has directed all hotels and restaurants to stop this immediately and has even given directions to the concerned authorities to enforce the new guidelines. This ruling of the Central Consumer Protection Authority is in line with its objective to protect consumer interests. See, the Central Consumer Protection Authority was established to regulate all matters related to the violation of the rights of the consumer. These rights of the consumer have been outlined under the Consumer Protection Act of 2019, which replaced the older Consumer Protection Act. The Act recognizes various rights of the consumer and even establishes a central authority to enforce these provisions and to protect the rights of the consumer and also to regulate any violations of consumer rights. The authority also has the powers to deal with any unfair trade practices by the industry and also to tackle false, misleading advertisements, which could be harming the interests of the consumer. Under Section 18 of this law, the Central Consumer Protection Authority has the powers to protect, promote, and most importantly, enforce the rights of the consumer and to prevent the violation of these rights by the industry. The authority can act against any industry or any business or enterprise which is engaging in unfair trade practices that could be hurting the interests of the customer. It also has the powers to issue time-to-time guidelines to ensure that the rights of the consumer is protected and upheld, and can even direct the concerned authorities at the national level, at the state level, and as well as at the district level to ensure that these new guidelines are followed and enforced. So in line with these provisions and powers, the Central Consumer Protection Authority has taken note of the unfair trade practice of levying service charges on customers by hotels and restaurants. The authority has classified this as an unfair trade practice and has issued directions to the hotel and restaurant industry to stop this practice immediately. It has also issued orders to the state authorities and district level authorities, that is to the chief secretaries of all states and the district magistrates, to enforce these guidelines in order to protect the interests of the consumer. Because providing service charge or a tip at a hotel or a restaurant should be a choice that is left to the consumer himself. And on any grounds, the hotel or restaurant cannot be enforcing this on the consumer. So to prevent this unfair trade practice, the Consumer Protection Authority has laid down a few new guidelines to be followed by the industry and also by the government authorities. The new guidelines make it very clear that any related grievances will be registered by the National Consumer Helpline, and any complaints received from the public will invite strict action by the authority. The logic here is that the consumer should be paying the bill only for the food and the service that they have consumed, and they shouldn't be forced to pay a tip which is often disguised in the form of service charge in the bills. It's also important to note that there is no restriction on hotels and restaurants to set the prices of the food menu. And in the service industry, the norm is that all the prices, including the service charges, should be accommodated within the set prices itself. The industry cannot be charging tips or service charges separately and expect consumers to foot this bill against their choice. So, this principle has been upheld by the Central Consumer Protection Authority and has clearly termed this practice as an unfair trade practice. So, under these new guidelines, the state and district authorities have been directed to enforce the new guidelines and even take action against any hotels and restaurants which might still be levying service charges. As a consumer, if you come across this practice, you can report this as well on the National Consumer Helpline by either calling the dedicated number 1915 or by registering your complaint on the mobile app or on the website of the National Consumer Helpline. These complaints will be acted upon and the Consumer Protection Authority will take strict action against the violators. Now let's take a look at a column from page number 9 that helps us examine the Forest Rights Act of 2006. See, since the colonial times, the government has always tried to exert its control in some way or the other over forests and forest resources. And this has deprived the rights of the native indigenous communities, which happen to be the forest dwelling tribes, who would be residing in these forests from centuries and would have built a symbiotic relationship with the forests. Generally, such forest dwelling communities and indigenous tribes, they rely on the forest resources for their livelihood, for their sustenance. But these communities generally practice sustainable exploitation as they understand and appreciate the importance of environment conservation. Generally, in several tribal communities and forest dwelling communities, environment conservation and biodiversity protection is ingrained into their culture because they know that their sustenance and their livelihood is directly dependent on the health and well being of the forests. That's the reason why, in many tribal cultures, forests, flora, and fauna they're worshipped, thus leading to a delicate, harmonious relationship between the forest dwelling communities and the forests. But this equation was disturbed by the enforcement of government rules since the colonial times, as the British were interested in exploiting forest resources for their economic gains. Post independence, the government of India has also tried to regulate forests and forest activities, but in the interest of conservation and protection. But these various environmental laws and forest laws, they have affected the traditional rights of the forest dwelling communities. So, to strike a balance between the two, the Forest Rights Act was enacted in 2006 that recognizes the rights of forest dwelling communities along with the rights of other traditional forest dwellers. This act was seen as a landmark legislation to recognize the livelihood rights, habitation rights, and other socio-cultural rights of indigenous forest dwelling tribes and other traditional forest dwellers. This act sought to promote conservation of our forests while guaranteeing the livelihood rights and food security of the forest dwelling communities. So accordingly, the Gram Sabha, which is a grassroots Panchayati Raj institution, was designated as the authority to decide upon the nature and extent of these rights to be enjoyed by the forest dwelling tribes. Under this act, both individual rights and community rights have been recognized, and the Gram Sabhas have been empowered to determine and enforce these rights. The rights guaranteed under the Act include title rights, which gives the forest dwelling communities and tribes the right to ownership of forest land for the purposes of subsistence farming, which is essential for their livelihood and nutrition. So, forest dwellers can obtain title rights up to a maximum of 4 hectares of forest land, which can then be used for cultivation and farming. The Act also recognizes usage rights, according to which the forest dwellers and forest dwelling tribes they can rely upon minor forest produce and even extract minor forest produce such as honey, fruits and berries, gum, resin, rubber, tendu leaves or tobacco leaves, etc. It also recognizes their rights to use forest areas for grazing their cattle and provides for relief and development rights in order to rehabilitate the forest dwelling communities in case they are illegally evicted or forcefully displaced due to environment protection laws or due to construction of public projects. It also provides for community forest management rights, under which the community plays a role in forest conservation and environment protection, and recognizes the right of forest dwelling communities to protect their forests and to regenerate and conserve their forest resources. The spirit of the Act has been designed to promote sustainable usage and exploitation of forest resources in order to guarantee the traditional rights to forest dwelling communities and tribes. But the enforcement of the Act has always run into a controversy due to poor implementation of these provisions on the ground. There have been several instances where, at the level of the Gram Sabha and the state governments, several genuine forest dwelling tribes have been excluded, and as a result, many traditional communities had to lose their forest rights. On the other hand, other communities or tribes not deserving of these forest rights, as per the provisions of the Act, have been recognized with their forest rights, thus leading to unfair inclusion as well. Many of these cases have come up at the Supreme Court, and in 2019, the Supreme Court passed a judgment ordering the revocation of these rights and even directed the government to evict many of the forest dwellers by branding them as illegal encroachers. So, on one hand, the government and the judiciary fail to uphold these rights of the forest dwelling communities despite the existence of the Act. And according to the writer, even human rights organizations and wildlife and environment conservation organizations have failed to use the Act effectively to protect the forest rights of forest dwelling communities and have also failed to use the Act effectively as a conservation tool to protect our forests and environment. Here, the writer points out the important role that Gram Sabhas can play when it comes to upholding the rights of forest dwelling communities. He takes the example of the Niyamgiri incident at the Niyamgiri Hills in Odisha, when the native tribe, the Dongriya Kond, stood up against an industrial project led by Vedanta Group to exploit bauxite that is found in large reserves at the Niyamgiri Hills. In this case, the Supreme Court back in 2013 had upheld the community right to reject any such harmful projects that could threaten the livelihood along with the traditional rights of the forest dwelling communities. In 2016 as well, the provisions of FRA or Forest Rights Act was invoked by the National Green Tribunal when the Lipa people of Himachal Pradesh were given the powers to decide whether or not they wanted a hydropower project in their area. But critics of the Act point out that there have been several bogus claims where even non-forest dwellers have claimed forest rights, thus leading to illegal encroachment of forest areas, which in turn contributes to environment degradation. So essentially, this debated controversy surrounding the implementation of Forest Rights Act has persisted for many years and has been further aggravated due to the poor implementation of the law. Recently, the Environment Ministry has notified a new set of forest conservation rules under the Act, and this has again triggered the same controversy. The opposition parties have alleged that the government is diluting the forest rights of forest dwelling tribes and communities, but the government has argued that the new rules will actually uphold the rights of forest dwelling communities while balancing their rights with the need for environment conservation. Now let's take a look at this article from page number 10, which evaluates the Mediation Bill and the stand that has been taken by a parliamentary standing committee against the proposed Mediation Bill. See, mediation refers to a type of alternate dispute resolution mechanism, and it is a voluntary binding process in which two litigants are offered mediation services through a neutral mediator in order to facilitate the two parties involved in the case to reach a negotiated and mediated settlement. Such mediation provides for effective alternate dispute resolution and helps avoid the painful judicial and legal process, and also reduces the burden on the judiciary. So it is essentially one of the types of alternate dispute resolution along with arbitration, conciliation, etc. So for mediation to be streamlined in India's legal judicial process, the government has proposed the Mediation Bill and has introduced this in the Parliament last year. This bill proposes to establish a mediation council which will oversee and regulate the mediation process and also gives powers to the High Court to frame the rules for mediation. But the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice, which has examined the provisions of the proposed bill, has taken a stand against these provisions and has specifically pointed out a few flaws in the proposed bill. The bill proposes to make mediation mandatory before the litigation process, and the Parliamentary Standing Committee takes a stand against this because if mediation is made mandatory before the legal process, then it might give an unfair advantage to the powerful party to force the weaker party to agree for a mediated settlement even before the matter reaches the court. Plus, the proposed bill empowers the High Court to make rules with regard to mediation. And according to the Parliamentary Standing Committee, this represents a conflict of interest because then the courts might be motivated to make such rules which will push most cases towards mediation instead of a legal hearing, as that would reduce the burden on the courts. The Parliamentary Standing Committee has even questioned the composition and powers of the Mediation Council, which is likely to affect its unbiased functioning and could end up harming the interests of the weaker parties. Hence, on these lines, the Parliamentary Standing Committee has opposed few provisions of the Mediation Bill as they appear to be against the spirit of the Constitution, and they have called upon the government to take a relook at the proposed Mediation Bill. Now let's take a look at this article from page number 12, which refers to the UN Population Report that has been brought out on the occasion of World Population Day. According to the UN Population Report, India's population has crossed 1.4 billion, and by 2023, India is all set to overtake China as the most populous country in the world. Together, these two countries will account for 2.8 billion people, and the global population is expected to hit 8 billion in November 2022. According to UN projections, global population could increase to 8.5 billion by 2030 and to a staggering 10.4 billion by the end of this century. The UN report clearly notes that population is increasing in several countries around the world due to high fertility rate in some countries and some regions, and due to low mortality rate as a result of increased life expectancy. In most countries, life expectancy has gone up due to advances in healthcare and medical care, thus significantly bringing down mortality rate. But fertility rate remains persistently high in several developing and underdeveloped nations, and is thus seen to be constantly pushing the global population. And this, according to the UN, could pose a significant challenge to economic growth and social development. As per the UN report, population increase will be mainly concentrated in 8 countries until 2050, and these countries include African countries such as Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Tanzania. It also includes Asian countries such as India, Pakistan, and Philippines. So these 8 countries are going to drive population growth and is likely to put a strain on global resources and as well as on growth and development. Then finally, let's take a look at 2 articles from page number 13, according to which Europe is getting worried about Russia's decision to cut off gas supplies from the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And parallelly, Lithuania, the Baltic state, is targeting Russia by widening the curbs on trade and movement over Russia's exclave Kaliningrad in Eastern Europe. See, as we have discussed in previous sessions, European countries have a critical dependency on Russia for their energy supplies. This map, sourced from BBC, depicts the key gas pipelines and oil pipelines in Europe, most of which are supplied by Russian oil and gas. Some of these old pipelines pass even through Ukraine and supplies gas to many European countries in Central Europe and in Western Europe as well. Then Russia has tried to reduce its dependency on Ukrainian pipelines by taking up the Nord Stream project with Germany, through which it established the Nord Stream 1 pipeline that runs under the Baltic Sea, and parallelly the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was also planned between the two countries. But following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Germany suspended the Nord Stream 2 project, and many European countries aligned with the US to impose economic sanctions against Russia. Russia retaliated against the European countries by putting pressure on oil and gas supplies, and recently it has shut down the Nord Stream 1 pipeline for 10 days by citing maintenance and repair work. And this has led to concern amongst European countries that if Russia shuts off the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, it might affect energy security of European nations. In the last few months, Russia has already cut down oil and gas supplies to Europe in retaliation to the Western economic sanctions. And now European countries are fearing that under the excuse of maintenance and repair work, Russia might seek to cut off supplies from Nord Stream 1 as well, which would threaten the energy stability of European nations. Parallelly, in Eastern Europe, Russia's exclave, Kaliningrad, which you can see over here, is being targeted and being put under pressure by European countries such as Poland and Lithuania. Kaliningrad is a Russian exclave since the days of the Second World War, and it's a key territory for Russia as Russia has a port here facing the Baltic Sea, and it happens to be the only ice-free Russian port during winters. So this critical exclave of Russia is being brought under pressure by the European countries, and Poland and Lithuania that border Kaliningrad, which are members of EU, they have cut off trade and connection with Kaliningrad and have imposed a blockade that has affected the movement of vehicles and trains along with the movement of goods and people into Kaliningrad. This blockade by Lithuania and Poland is putting pressure on Russia, and Russia is reportedly working with its ally Belarus to counter this blockade by Lithuania in order to ensure that supplies reach Kaliningrad. So these are a couple of important updates that you need to be aware of with regard to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now let's take a look at a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, what do you understand by dark matter? What is the significance of the Lux Zeppelin experiment? Examine in detail. The second question, evaluate the role and functions of Central Consumer Protection Authority. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link has been given in the description box below. So on this note, I would like to conclude this discussion, and if you're liking the initiative, do let us know by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.